Every year, one of the most well-received aspects of this conference is a panel of some sort. And this year I am really honored to be joined by 4 individuals on the stage who will participate in a panel about participating in clinical trials. All day we've heard why clinical trials are so important and how improvements in clinical care in medicine writ large ultimately rely on clinical trials. What you really haven't heard so far today is that perhaps the single greatest challenge to successful clinical trials is accruing adequate numbers of participants to be able to answer the critical scientific questions we ask with these important studies. The data I'm putting up now come from a large assessment of studies across areas of medicine, but it's certainly true in Alzheimer's disease and related clinical trials as well. The most frequent reason that clinical trials fail is because not enough people participate. And those who follow UCI Mind in any way or have heard me speak know that I feel incredibly strongly that the people who participate in these trials are no longer patients. They're the most important members of our research team, and I use terms like research hero to describe them. So I'm really deeply honored to have a chance to, in a moment, introduce you to the research heroes to my left. But just a bit more about why this is so important a topic. It's not just do we get enough people in the trial, the rate at which we get people into trials matters too. At best, a trial that takes longer than expected to accrue a full sample will have delays in making these promising candidate therapies available to all the patients who need them. At worst, there are implications to the science of a clinical trial if participation rates are slow, if trials need to be changed in order to get adequate numbers, and other methodological challenges. So what this panel is going to tell you is, why did they do this? How do we learn from them to get better at the way we design studies, the way we go about recruiting to studies, and answer our questions more rapidly? This is one of my teaching slides about why people participate in clinical trials. You don't have to worry about the numbers or the bullets, because I'll tell you that across areas of medicine and neurological conditions especially, people participate in clinical trials for largely quite similar reasons, and I summarize them here. They trust the people performing the study. They want to do good. They want to help mankind. And they hope that they will get something out of it. They hope they will get access to a treatment that is improved, perhaps unparalleled compared to the currently available therapies, and to gain that access before it's even available through general medical practice. I think another critical thing for me to emphasize is that we take very seriously as clinical trialists, and I know it's the case for all of the speakers you've heard from so far or will hear from today, that the trust these individuals place in us is paramount. And we take so very seriously the ethical obligations of protecting the individuals who participate in studies. Sometimes it means stopping a trial as rapidly as possible. Always it means keeping them in the know about what's going on with the study and keeping them informed. And you heard a bit of that this morning, and I'm eager to share more along those lines through this session. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our panel of experts. I'm going to start with Cathy and Floyd Bush on my far left. Cathy is a participant in the Biogen Prime study, which you heard about in Dr. Cummings' opening lecture. You saw these very data and the promise they hold for our field. The Biogen Prime study is a study of aducanumab, a monoclonal antibody against the amyloid beta protein, which again, as you heard, has been shown to be able to take amyloid out of the brain and reduce levels. This is an 18-month study, placebo-controlled, and aducanumab is infused directly into the bloodstream. And so participants in this study, like Cathy, have to come into the medical center at least once a month to receive an intravenous infusion of drug or placebo. So, Cathy and Floyd, welcome. Thank you very much for doing this today. The microphone is there. I wanted to begin with you and ask, whose idea was it to be in this clinical trial?
Well, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. First, if you had asked me 4 years ago, could I explain what a what a clinical trial is? Sometimes I think it's a criminal, but
that's a separate
I probably
conference.
did not. The only thing I could tell you was it was something the FDA did, and I didn't know a whole lot about it. But what happened in our situation was Cathy was having some problems with word retrieval issues. And my background is I'm retired military and second career in a management of an aluminum company. So I tend to be very aggressive moving forward and solving problems. So I immediately jumped on, and Cathy kept saying, I'm having this issue. So we, again, talked with our two medical focused son and daughter. My son's a staff cardiologist at UCLA, assistant professor, and my daughter is a director of nursing. She just finished up her PhD, and she's running nursing for a hospital in White Plains, New York. And the two of them immediately put their heads together and scheduled Cathy with a meeting at UCLA with actually Dr. Mendez, who's pretty well known as a neurologist at UCLA, and she participated in a variety of testing there. And that's when we started to understand a little bit more that there were other opportunities as far as clinical trials. So I can tell you that from that point on, we were very fortunate in the fact that they recommended us to UCI and Dr. Pierce. And she was able to get us enrolled in the program and really explain what the program was all about. So that's just a quick overview of how we first got into the program. It was through both medical intervention through our son and daughter, and really through the medical people at UCLA and UCI.
One of the reasons why we wanted to do this and get the kids involved, this may not help me over my lifetime, but I want it to be something that's eradicated, or as much as you can. And I want that to happen for my children and for my children's children. And, we're really invested in it. And so I couldn't do better than finding Dr. Amy.
So it sounds like your children had a big role in how you decided that clinical trials might be right for you, and perhaps even whether this specific trial was right for you.
Yes, and the other thing that was really important is Dr. Pierce's communication. She did a very good job of outlining what the program was all about, where it was in its phases, and also what the potential outcome was, recognizing it was a double blind. It was, there's a risk involved there as well. We realized that we were going to take that. But again, the kids were quite supportive because they did a lot of research too. And it just so happened that this particular program was very well communicated in some of the medical journals, Nature back a couple of years ago, And we were able to find that information so we could make an independent evaluation as well as what Dr. Pierce was communicating to us.
So I have to ask, you said that you recognized it was a double-blind study and the risk associated with that's the risk of being assigned to placebo.
Yes.
As opposed to the drug risks, which we also spend a great deal of time communicating in the informed consent process about any study.
Well, the other thing that was also important that mitigated the risk a little bit is that the amount of medical support that we were going to get during the clinical evaluation. MRIs, where are you with the tau, with your amyloid buildup? And so we really felt that even though we may or may not get the actual medication, that we would get a true understanding of where we really are and as far as Cathy was concerned in the process. Because my initial evaluation, and I believe with Cathy and the kids, was that she has a mild case of her cognitive processing. So we didn't have all of the other things that you guys heard this morning that other people have been experiencing. And the other thing is she's very disciplined as far as her diet is concerned and exercise. She works out every day, and she can't drive anymore because she also has an eye problem. But she does participate 4 or 5 times a week at the gym, and we both walk every day. And she eats nothing but lettuce.
Not quite.
One last question. How long have you guys been married?
49 years.
It'll be 49 years on the 27th of September. So.
Congratulations. Cathy and Floyd, as a married couple, really represent the most common enrolled dyad in Alzheimer's disease clinical trials. And in all clinical trials, the 3 you'll hear about from the panel today and all the trials you heard about this morning, we never enroll just one person in a study. We always enroll a person who's going to participate, take the drug or placebo, have the infusions, undergo the memory tests, and we enroll a study partner, a person who may or may not accompany the participant to visits, will complete measures associated with the trial, measuring the behavioral symptoms we heard about this morning, measuring activities of daily living we heard about this morning, et cetera. And the data I'm showing you here are data I published with my colleague Dr. Karlowish and other colleagues from San Diego, where we looked at the patterns of enrollment in clinical trials and found that it was strikingly consistent. 66% of participants in our clinical trials enroll with their spouse as their study partner. On the face of it, it may not surprise you until I tell you that the majority of Alzheimer's patients in this country don't have a spouse. The number one most common caregiver of people with Alzheimer's disease in this country is adult daughters. 2 out of every 3 patients with Alzheimer's disease is a woman, and many women outlive their husbands. So in fact, it makes sense. Yet it is so strikingly different from the patterns of enrollment in our clinical trials. And we believe this is really important for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that if we can do a better job of recruiting patients who don't have a spouse into our trials, we may be able to answer scientific questions more rapidly. And that means getting people like Gwen Ritchie and her mom Suzanne to participate in trials. Gwen's mom has been in the SNF study, the ADCS clinical trial of inhaled insulin for mild cognitive impairment. A similarly 18-month clinical trial of intervention that's inhaled through a nebulizing device. It's a 50-50 randomization, drug or placebo. Fewer visits compared to the Biogen trial, but still a significant level of contribution and activity for people participating in this trial. So Gwen, thank you for being here. Welcome to the panel. How did you and your mom decide to participate in a clinical trial?
We were first introduced to the trial by Dr. Amy Pierce. My mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and has been seeing Dr. Pierce for several years. My mom, Suzanne, is one of 6 siblings, and 5 have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So Dr. Pierce thought with her family history that she might be a good candidate to look into some trials. One of the main reasons why we decided to join was we needed some hope. It's a horrendous disease, and we were thinking that maybe if we received the real drug, we would be able to maintain some of her memory levels. And realizing that the disease is a marathon and not a sprint, we needed to do something proactive as her family, and it really helped us feel less helpless. We just didn't want to react to her symptoms and her decline. We wanted to do something proactive, even though we may or may not receive the real drug. In addition, I think my mom is a retired art teacher. She's lived a life of teaching and in education, and I think in her heart she really believed or really believes that this trial could help find a cure and help generations, and that's just in her personality. The SNF trial was pretty easy to make a decision on. After a year of doing the work, we received the real drug for 6 months. So knowing that it was a reward at the end was very enticing. It was, something to work towards. But I think most importantly for my family, we felt that this disease is it affects so many people, and I think it takes a village to take care of my mom. I mean, I was thinking about the ratio of adults to take care of a little Asian older lady, and it's 5 adults to 1 person, and I don't think there's going to be enough people with good memories in the next generation to take care of the memory impaired. So those are my top reasons why we chose to join the SNF program.
And were there any things you had to overcome in order to be able to participate in the study? Burdens that you bear because of being in the trial, or logistical challenges to actually be able to go to the visits?
I think the biggest challenge for our family is Alzheimer's patients tend not to cooperate. The background of my mom is she's super feisty and she needs to know every detail. She's extremely intelligent and opinionated. She's physically very fit. She goes to Zumba classes a couple times a week. And so, but what happens is she has the ability to run away from me when she gets angry. And so, ironically, UCI security is really used to finding her when she leaves, when she takes off from her doctors. It's happened with Dr. Pierce, and we just let her leave the office, and then we find her. I have her on GPS on her phone. And but so she's really, it's challenging. It's challenging to do the trial. In addition to our daily care for my mom and keeping her active cognitively and physically, we have to administer 2 doses of the SNF, and there's a strict time protocol. You have to give the SNF within a certain period of time. Doing anything with an Alzheimer's patient on a strict time protocol is extremely challenging. She will only cooperate if you tell her why she's getting it, who she's giving it, who ordered it, what's going to happen. And by the time you finish your story, she's forgotten and you have to start all over again. So the caregivers, family members get frustrated, she gets more upset, she becomes more uncooperative. So for a year now, we've been dealing with this every day, but we've stuck to it because we really know that it's important. And but for the people who are writing and designing these trials, understand that it sounds really easy. Give the patient 2 doses of medication, go for blood draws fast. It is it is a lifestyle, participating in these trials. For me, it's been tough balancing my husband, my 3 kids, and my grandbaby, and taking care of my mom at the same time. But I try to spin it, like I said earlier, this is more of a marathon. I try to spin it and say, you know what, that's dedicated time with my mom. We often try to do something fun afterwards, and we go to lunch, we shop, we try to just make it part of our life.
That's great. Thank you. Another thing we heard a bit about today, and we'll hear much more about this afternoon, is the notion that much of our effort is moving earlier and earlier in disease. And now we're even doing clinical trials in people who don't have any diagnosis whatsoever, people who have normal memory, perfect cognition, but in whom biological tests, biomarker tests, suggest risk for developing cognitive problems may be increased. And we are doing the first ever clinical trial of this type here at UCI. It's called the A4 study, or the anti-amyloid in treatment in asymptomatic Alzheimer's disease study. And Kent Welbrock is a participant in this clinical trial. The A4 study was designed as a 3-year clinical trial, 1-to-1 randomization. Again, a monoclonal antibody therapy that's injected into a vein in the arm monthly. So it's 3 years of monthly visits that people like Kent have signed up to participate in, except that we amended the trial. And the trial was elongated from 3 years to 4.5 years. And at the same time, we quadrupled the dose. So I'm extremely grateful to Kent to join the panel and talk about his experiences. And I want to begin by asking about how you learned about the A4 study.
My wife and I initially read probably multiple articles, but one article in the Orange County Register about the trial and, if you will, an information session. And we were motivated to hear from that group of people, to include Dr. Grill, Dr. Pierce, etc., what they wanted to do, what the trial was about, so forth. So that's initially how we heard about it. And then the audience at that particular information session had an opportunity to ask a number of questions. We had our own, etc. What's it about? What are the circumstances, so forth and so on. And we really walked out of there together. She wasn't my study partner. She wanted to do the test herself, the program herself, and later found out that she didn't qualify because of the PET scan, etc. So we said to ourselves, it's a no-brainer. We want to do this. The questions were satisfied. Certainly an awful lot of unknowns, and there still are, but that's part of the progress.
And to be in that clinical trial, you had to have a PET scan. And the PET scan was to measure the amyloid protein in the brain. And only people who have sufficient amounts of amyloid are eligible to be in the study. Can you walk me through what it was like to think about whether you wanted to have that scan?
Well, I guess we went into it. I went into it with an open mind, saying it is what it is. And part of the motivation for accepting the responsibility of the study and participating in it was our family. My mother passed away 4 years ago at the age of 98. She had Alzheimer's. We went through that progression of memory loss, dementia, et cetera, et cetera. And our children, who are both grown and married now, did that also. So we did it without asking our kids, because we wanted to be transparent as a family. And if we, or as in this case, I, progressed to that point of having that diagnosis, want to tell them up front and what to anticipate and what we as a family have to do. So the amyloids, that level of enlightenment didn't bother me or bother us at all.
Thank you. One last question for you. Did you think about dropping out when the study went from 3 to 4.5 years and the dose got increased?
Absolutely not. It's a committed process, and the timeline didn't make any difference. And I think one of the reasons, I don't think it would have been the deciding factor, but it's certainly a contributing factor, is the staff that I see every month, both for the injections, the infusions, the cognitive tests, and much to the credit of Dr. Grill and Dr. Amy Pierce. Their commitment and their care and putting up with me, 4.5 years is a drop in the bucket.
Thank you. You know, the question came up earlier about informed consent, and I hope it was clear that research is always voluntary. These folks are doing this largely out of the goodness of their hearts and their commitment to helping us with what we're trying to achieve. They're always free to change their mind. An individual can always decide they no longer want to be in a clinical trial. That is always within their right. Informed consent is a process. It's not a document. The document we use is not a contract. I'm extremely pleased to report that UCI Mine is following 30 people in the A4 study. And of the 30, 0 dropped out when the study was amended, which I think speaks to the incredible commitment of these individuals and others like them who are participating in studies with us and around the country and indeed the world. A few questions for the panel, and then we are going to open it up to the audience for questions of our expert panel. This informed consent process, were there specific questions you really felt like you needed to get answered, or that you might recommend someone else in your position ask the investigator when meeting the investigator and talking about the study for the first time? Go ahead, Floyd.
Well, when we first met with Amy after we were referred from UCLA, one of the key issues that I was concerned about was what was the successes that had occurred up until the point that we were considering joining the program, and she was considering allowing us to be into the program. The other thing is that I was quite interested personally with where this particular medication came from, and in this particular case it was Biogen. And I did quite a bit of research around Biogen, so I felt very comfortable that I saw the staff at UCI in their approach, and I also saw where the medication was coming from, and that was important enough for us. But the other thing too was the risk that I mentioned earlier, is the fact that as long as we were going to get the kind of what I felt was quality evaluation of Cathy's amyloid burden, I guess you want to really say about it, is the fact that we were able to really understand the complexity of what she was going through at this particular time in her path of where she's eventually going to go. And we were hoping that this medication would be the breakthrough that would either slow it down or eliminate it. And so that was the first most important thing to us when we decided we were going to participate in the study.
Gwen, do you remember specific questions you asked?
I know that one of the answers to one of my questions was, who's going to take care of my mom during this trial period? And for us, it was Dr. Pierce through the whole, both privately as well as in the trial. And it was a benefit knowing that Dr. Pierce was going to be going over her MRI results. And even though she couldn't discuss some of the stuff, she always said if there's something, alarming, of course, she would my mom as a patient privately would come first. So that was a concern, and also my aunts, it alleviated any worries for us. So.
And that should always be the case, and certainly is, that the safety of individuals is always paramount, and the only thing that's more important than answering the scientific question. Ken, you want to?
A lot of those questions were answered in the information session because they were asked not only by my wife and I, but by other participants. So a number of those questions were already pre-answered, if you will. And mine were more routine when we got into the final decision. What's the process? MRIs, spine tap, PET scans, monthly infusions, the mechanics, the administrative process of it. And whereas my initial motivation was not for me, but to really, if you will, honor my mother and her struggle with Alzheimer's, but anybody else. Somebody's got to do this, somebody should do it, etc. But I did have the question in some form or fashion, what's in it for me? Will I know if you see changes during the period of my infusions, so forth and so on? And basically, no. I don't know whether I'm getting the drug or whether I'm getting the placebo. And I won't know until the end of 4.5 years or plus. So that's fine by me. If whatever I can contribute, and hopefully it will give positive results, that's good by me.
One last question for each before we open it up. If you could do it all over again, would you make the same decision to enroll in the clinical trial? Go ahead, Floyd.
Yeah, absolutely. At first, they all said, "Oh, you're silly." My background is speech pathology, and I said, "No, there's something different, that just changed a little bit." That was almost 4 years ago, but I was the one intuitively. I knew that there was something going on, and to find the right place is just more than I could have asked for, and that was great.
Absolutely, we would do it over again. Once we, started to learn how to administer the drugs and got in a groove with my mom, it was going a lot more smoothly. And just meeting everyone and it being, just part of this journey of this disease.
No question. There would be no downside to me continuing. I never did have that question, even when it was added on to the original time frame.
Okay. Our expert panel has agreed to take questions from the audience. There's a microphone coming.
Right over here. During the discovery process, when you were deciding about whether to join the study, are there disclosures made by the researchers if they have any interest in the companies that make the drugs that you're involved with? At what point does that happen? And if there were disclosures like that, how did you wrangle with that in your mind?
You guys want me to take that one? So there are formal processes for reviewing what we call conflicts of interest. And the university handles this mostly. As a member of clinical trial networks, we have sort of other levels at which this type of thing is reviewed, so that an individual who has a relationship that could be in conflict with their ability to perform the study at the highest level would be prevented from participating in the study as an investigator. This actually is included in informed consent documents when it's needed, but for the most part we try to preclude individuals who might be in such positions from having roles in the different studies.
Yeah, two dimensions of the question maybe. First of all, in terms of qualifying for the research, did you need to quantify a lot of aspects of your lives that you might later think of changing or altering to your own benefit for other reasons? And kind of secondarily, are you sensitive to the kinds of additional symptoms or side effects that might be associated with it, and distinguishing those from normal aging and other things that might be, separate from the administration of the medication?
One of my biggest concerns was the second part of your question, and that is with my mom, it's really hard to have her express and communicate to us how she feels, whether it's better or worse, over a period of time. In the moment, she can answer, oh, well, the nasal administration stings my nose, or, that doesn't feel good. But over time, it's really, really difficult. So it's hard to distinguish whether it's a trial symptom from the medication or just the general disease progression. It takes a super caregiver and a detective family members to almost really be in touch with your relative. And it's really hard. That's a big concern of mine. It's hard to assess, and I will say, I don't know if I can say this now, but I have seen Mom have some lucid moments that she did not have now that she's on the real drug versus over the past year. So you can read in between the lines on that, but I've noticed, and it's because I do spend time with her, and I can see that. But it is frustrating because she cannot communicate, and it's frustrating for me when medical personnel ask her, well, how have you been feeling over the past 3 months? She does not know, nor she can answer. And matter of fact, it makes it worse because she may answer just what she thinks is the right answer, and then they're jotting it down, and I'm like, time out. That's not what's really happening, so.
I guess also the second part of the question, no, absolutely nothing in the way of the infusions, the process or whatever bothered me after the fact, with one exception, and that's I'm a bad patient. When I had my first spinal tap, I was told to go home and do nothing for 4 or 6 hours, take a nap. I didn't, and I suffered a headache and fatigue and this and that, so spank me, but nothing else happened.
That's not in the protocol.
I'm assuming that there's ongoing or periodic assessment with regard to how the study is affecting you. Are you told about the results of those assessments? And if you are, has that affected you with regard to your decision to stay in the trial?
Let me try to answer that, because we have very frequent communications with the staff at UCI, phone calls, visits, MRIs, blood work. I mean, this goes on continuously. So I would say at least once every 2 weeks we're in contact with somebody at UCI through the medical staff. The feedback probably isn't, I don't get on Cathy, I don't get the feedback directly from them, but I do get a feeling on how she's feeling because I'm answering a lot of those questions when that phone call rings. And she's extremely expressive, can relate to how she feels and any kind of medical issues that she may have. And she really hasn't had any as far as it relates to this particular program. But the other thing is that, as I was listening to some of the presentations this morning, the interest that we have all of a sudden developed over the last 3 or 4 years, exercise, diets, those lifestyle, socializing with other people. Are we really doing all of those things that we saw in the presentations today? And the answer is, yeah, we make a very good effort to try to do all those things. The questions that we get from the medical staff don't necessarily ask all those particular questions, but they relate to us as we go through this particular study.
Yeah, in terms of my progression with the infusion, no, there is no feedback, because even the staff, participants at UCI, don't know whether I'm getting the placebo or the real test drug. But that will come at the end. The other routine tests, if you will, are the cognitive tests. Everything from tests on the iPad, et cetera, and I'm not getting any feedback that is a concern. The worst feedback, or lack thereof, comes from my wife as my study partner, because she won't tell me what she told them.
I was in a Alzheimer's research study like this 20 years ago. My mom had Alzheimer's, and so many people in our family did that they accepted me. I was the youngest one in the group. I was only 52. But the thing I noticed, the difference here, is all the information you're getting from this, the feedback you get, and everything that we did at that time. This was at UCLA. Excuse me, Dr. Gary Small. I get shaky sometimes. We didn't find out if we had the gene. They weren't telling us any testing. I had the MRIs and the PET scan, and we received no information. But this was a very early study, I think. It seems like it was, being 20 years ago. And let's see. Oh, it was only 2 years. I went for like 2 weeks, and then 2 years later repeated the whole thing. And then we were going to repeat it again as a group, but they stopped that study and changed to something else. They were going to study Celebrex after that. But this was just doing the MRIs, the PET scans, lots of testing. You reminded me about all the testing you have to do all the time. That's the part I hated.
Yeah, so we're often pretty limited in what we can give back. And again, safety is always our top priority, but after that, it's our responsibility to make sure we're asking and answering a question. And giving back too much information in some situations can actually have an impact on our ability to answer the question, depending on the trial design and the purpose. So we're usually very protocol defined in what information can be shared. And I will add, 20 years ago, we knew far less. And so one thing that we're always very careful about is when we give information back, do we know enough to really tell people what it means to give them the results of new technology especially. So it's pretty rare that we give people genetic information back. It's pretty rare we give biomarker information back, and it's usually for very specific reasons. Other things we try to give back to help people in their lives. So if we're doing routine laboratories that your primary care physician would want to run anyway, and you want your primary care physician to receive those, we are more than happy to create those arrangements to try to make it easy for you. And to the extent that we're able, we always like giving information back, especially at the conclusion of a study. And I know we at UCI Mind and others take very seriously the responsibility of bringing people who participate in our studies back to hear what we learned, and to share how we're moving the field forward because of the remarkable contributions of people enrolled in studies.
Thank you for your significant contributions. As you were considering enrolling in a clinical trial, and once you enrolled, did you have any conversations with your health insurance provider, either your provider or other family members' providers? And can you comment on that conversation?
In our particular case, like I said, I'm retired military, so we have TRICARE, and frankly, we haven't said anything about them. However, our doctor, who we visit quite frequently, He is aware, and we, as Josh was suggesting, there is some information that goes back to him. And he does keep track of what Cathy is doing. In fact, she just had an appointment with him a week and a half ago. So the answer is yes, but not with the actual provider, no.
My mom's a retired school teacher, so from a medical insurance standpoint, no, we didn't check in with anybody there. I didn't even think about that, actually. But as far as communication with her primary care physician is at UCI Senior Health, so he has access to the test results, I know that. But as far as anything to do with the study, no.
Same for me, too. I didn't even consider our provider, but all of my information goes back to our primary care physician, including the MRI results, et cetera, et cetera. So happy with that.
Several of you have mentioned Dr. Amy Pierce being involved in getting into the studies. Is she still involved even though she's left UCI?
Dr. Pierce left, a couple months ago, and very sad. We had our last visit, but she has been wonderful with my mom for the past 5 years, and she actually did not mention the study for my mom to be included into a study until maybe the past 2 years. So she never really pushed us into it. She wasn't, she just suggested it, that we looked into it. But we're going to miss her very much.
Me too. And no one should ever be pushed into a study. And Dr. Pierce, just for everyone's information, Dr. Pierce was principal investigator of a number of clinical trials at UCI Mine. She was there with us for 8 years. She has gone to her home state of Oregon to be a part of our sister center at Oregon Health Sciences University. We're very pleased that she had that chance, and wish her all the best. I still talk to her on an as-needed basis, and we'll see her routinely at national meetings, so we wish her all the best. All right. Well, I think, I hope you will join me in thanking this expert panel for giving us a glimpse into what it's like to be in a clinical trial.